Welcome to our workshop on the big 6 pollution sources and how to resolve the impact of each to your favorite waterway. This is Richard Klein. I'm President of Community and Environmental Defense Services. We help individuals and citizen groups all over the U.S. with a variety of threats to neighborhoods and the environment. So the next time your favorite waterway is threatened, give us a call. These are some of the guidance documents referenced in this presentation. All can be downloaded free from our Watershed Audits webpage, ceds.org/audit. Just click on Audit Guidance Documents along the left column, which will then take you to a list of publications. This presentation is divided into these 8 topics. Viewing all 8 takes a bit more than an hour. While this presentation is geared to those concerned about the Chesapeake Bay and her 100,000 miles of tributaries, the procedures work for identifying and correcting problems in many other areas. Here you see photos of the Big 6. Why are these the Big 6? Because collectively they account for the majority of the pollution degrading the Chesapeake and her tributaries. The pie chart in the upper right shows the percent of total bay nitrogen loading from each of these sources. Note that construction sites, runoff from existing suburban urban areas, and point source discharges are lumped into one category, which is the largest. This is also the only category which is increasing thanks to new development. Here are some examples of what you can accomplish with the guidance provided in this presentation. I've been a professional environmental advocate for more than 40 years. Nothing has given me as much satisfaction as the time when I discovered a pollution source and got it corrected. Unfortunately, opportunities abound out there for you to do the same. Why is that unfortunate? Well, it means there is an awful lot of pollution out there yet to be corrected, but with your assistance, we can greatly accelerate that process. Now on to our second topic. Most newcomers think you need a lawyer to get problems solved. Fortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. Most problems are resolved by working cooperatively with the person responsible for the pollution, an enforcement agency, or elected officials. By using this cooperative approach, you'll not only get more problems solved, but you'll build a positive relationship with those who live and work in your watershed and with government agencies. In the future, you'll encounter problems where resolution will hinge upon support from all of these folks. Here we see a very simplistic comparison of the 2 approaches to problem solving. The sheer expense and availability of willing attorneys greatly limits the number of problems you can attack through litigation. But once you learn cooperation first and other approaches, the only thing limiting your successes will be how much time you can devote. And as each success expands your base of public support, you'll find waterway restoration getting easier and easier. So is there a need for citizens to look for pollution? After all, isn't there a massive network of environmental inspectors out there keeping watch over all sources? Well, if only that were true, and the 3 examples you see here testifies to just how bad things are. The best solution of this poor state of compliance is in greatly expanding the number of people, like you, looking for and advocating correction of these problems. Okay, so we're agreed there's a genuine need for citizens to look for pollution, but how can you do this without getting into trouble for trespassing? Fortunately, most of what you need to see is visible from nearby public areas, like the stormwater BMPs you can see from an adjacent parking lot or public road. So no need to trespass, and if you follow our Cooperation First approach, you'll be protected from lawsuits thanks to the First Amendment. While some might argue that we should focus on projects to restore degraded waterways, this table shows that it's clearly better to prevent pollution in the first place. The mud wash from a single construction site can degrade 3 miles of downstream waters, but it costs a mere $200 for a government inspector to keep the site in compliance, while it takes more than $16,000 in 5 years to partially restore the damaged waterway through restoration. If you come across a situation which poses an imminent threat to public health or safety, you should report it immediately to an enforcement agency. Pictured above is a dam that is washing out during a flood. This is clearly an imminent threat. Later we'll show you how to spot dams where this may occur. The lower picture is of a stormwater pond full of sediment and cattails. Though this is seriously reduced pollution removal, it doesn't pose an imminent threat to public health or safety. These non-imminent issues are best pursued through our cooperation first approach. You should refer imminent problems with a phone call and a follow-up email. The text on the right is an example of an email or a phone script. Here you see the toll-free numbers in each Chesapeake watershed state and D.C. to report pollution problems posing an imminent threat. Later in this presentation, we'll show you how to contact enforcement agencies about other non-imminent pollution sources. Here you see the essence of cooperation first. Usually it begins with a neighborly letter to the person responsible for the problem, aka the polluter. Always say there may be a problem and suggest a responsible party contact an enforcement agency if in doubt. But half the time they'll just go ahead and fix the problem. If your local enforcement agencies are severely overworked, this approach will get problems fixed far more quickly than a referral ever would. Pictured above is a construction site in blatant violation of the requirement to quickly get disturbed soil stabilized with mulch or grass. In the upper left is a letter sent to the developer by the local watershed organization. The lower photo of the fully stabilized site was taken 9 days later. Rest assured the bare soil would have continued eroding for weeks or months had the watershed group not acted. No enforcement agency was involved, though this project was started after consulting with local officials. You can accomplish the same regardless of your formal training or lack thereof. So how do you figure out who is the responsible party for a pollution source? Well, it's usually obvious. In the upper left is a failing stormwater BMP in the foreground, which is obviously owned by the convenience store in the background. Most states have an online system for determining property ownership. If your cooperative efforts fail, then refer the problem to an enforcement agency. Later we'll explain whom to contact for each Big Six category. If you find the enforcement agency unresponsive, then escalate progressively using the tactics presented in the box on the right. And when all else fails, then begin threats of litigation. But don't immediately hire the first lawyer you think of. Instead, use our smart legal strategies approach to maximize the likelihood of success with minimum expense. However, if your goal is to set a legal precedent, then you're likely in a hurry to get before an appellate court. Now for the first of our Big Six sources. Here you see the reasons why it's so vitally important that we keep mud, sediment, on the construction site and what you could accomplish. The publication on the left provides detail on how to identify and correct sediment control problems anywhere in the Chesapeake watershed. The table on the right gives numbers to call to report sediment and stormwater problems throughout Maryland. Numbers for the other Bay watershed states and D.C. will be found within the publication on the left. Both publications are available at CEDS.org/audit. With your help, we hope to establish the widespread public perception that exposed soil equals pollution. In other words, we hope that when people see exposed soil on a construction site, they'll think pollution and bad, bad, bad. We hope that eventually exposed construction site soil will evoke the same reaction as junk cars on lawns or littering. Once ES equals P becomes a widely held belief, voluntary compliance with construction site stabilization requirements may become as common as voluntary participation with curbside recyclables collection or keeping lawns mowed. Here's how erosion-sediment control works. First, a narrow swath is cleared along the downslope perimeter of a site. A swale or silt fence is installed in the swath to collect sediment-laden runoff once the rest of the site is cleared. You see an example of both in the upper right photo. Sediment trapping measures, like the middle right photo, are also installed along the perimeter. Combined, the swale, silt fence, and trap can keep a third to half the eroded soil on site. With as little as 3 days to a maximum of 30 days, the contractor is required to bring the site up to rough grade and cover all disturbed soils with straw mulch and grass seed. The grass must then form a cover of 95% or better within the next 4 to 8 weeks. A cover this dense will reduce mud pollution by up to 99%. Here's what we mean by rough grade. In the upper right, we're looking at a hill from the side. The hill slope is too steep to construct buildings and roads, so bulldozers and other heavy equipment are used to lower the elevation on the uphill part of the site by cutting. The cut soil is then used to fill the lower part of the site to bring the entire site to rough grade, creating a flatter area for construction. At rough grade, the soil surface will frequently look as rugged as that in the upper photo on the left. As soon as the site reaches rough grade, all disturbed soils should be treated with a protective layer of mulch and seeding. The exception are road and parking lot beds, which are protected with a layer of stone. As the site nears completion, heavy equipment will return to the site to smooth the soil to final grade as shown in the lower left photo. Each Bay State in DC requires a quick stabilization on the site perimeter, some within as little as 3 days of initial clearing. If a site is at rough grade or building and road construction has begun, then all exposed soils should be covered with mulch. And then the mulch should be replaced whenever it starts thinning out enough to see the underlying soil. During the growing season, grass should cover 95% of the soil within 4 to 8 weeks of seeding. Here are 3 examples of situations you may find on a construction site that pose an imminent threat and should be reported immediately. Muddy water flowing from a site, like that in the lower right photo, should be reported right away. A mudslide at the perimeter, such as the upper left, should be reported. Gullies should be reported unless they drain to a trapping device, as shown in the upper right. If mud has escaped off-site, then it should be reported so cleanup can begin before the next flood washes it downstream. Now on to stormwater best management practices. The publication on the left provides detail on how to identify and correct stormwater BMP problems anywhere in the Chesapeake watershed. The table on the right gives numbers to call to report sediment and stormwater problems in Maryland. Numbers for the other Bay States in DC will be found within the publication on the left. This slide illustrates the 2 different approaches to stormwater management you'll encounter. On the right, we have a 28-acre watershed with 80 homes. All the runoff is managed with a single extended detention pond placed at the end of the storm drain system. Most projects developed from 1980 on will have this type of stormwater management. As shown in the left photos, all 6 Bay watershed states and DC now require placing smaller, though far more protective, BMPs throughout a development site. These practices are placed at downspouts, next to parking lots, and in other points to treat runoff before it collects in the storm drain system. You'll encounter 4 types of BMPs. From here, we'll focus on 3. The dry extended detention ponds, pictured in the upper right, trap so little pollution they're not worth evaluating, though they are great retrofit sites. Note that as much as a third of all Bay watershed impervious area may drain to existing BMPs. It's believed that many have failed due to poor maintenance. Through your efforts, many could be restored, which would keep a tremendous amount of pollution out of the Chesapeake Bay. To find stormwater BMPs, focus on development that occurred after 1980. Google Earth and other aerial photos may go back to the 90s, so may help locate these older developments. Most BMPs are ponds and will be found at the downslope edge of a project. With newer and most future projects, the BMPs will be spread throughout the site, like the bioretention area shown in the lower right photo. Now we'll explain how to evaluate the first of the 3 BMP types, ponds that retain a permanent pool of water. These BMPs remove a third to half of runoff pollutants. Removal is mostly by settling, so the more water retained by the pond, the more pollution retained. Plants do little to enhance pollutant removal and actually hinder it by reducing water volume. Over time, the pond will fill with sediment, which is then colonized by cattails and other plants. The pond should be cleaned to the original volume when more than half full. The dredged sediment should be spread on grassed areas upslope of the pond where rain will cause pollutants in the sediment to infiltrate the soil, which keeps up to 95% of the pollutants out of nearby waterways. Here are some examples of pond issues that constitute an imminent threat to public safety. Most ponds are created by placing an earth embankment across a shallow valley. These embankment ponds are subject to washout if low spots form along the top of the earth dam. So if you ever see a low spot along the top of an earth dam, that must be reported immediately. Don't wait. However, some dams, particularly larger ones, have intentional low spots called emergency spillways. It'll be obvious whether the low spot you're looking at was engineered and designed as part of the pond or has become a result of settlement of the pond embankment itself. Tree and animal burrows can also threaten dam safety, but are not quite an imminent threat. Both trees and burrows should be removed quickly from the embankment. Infiltration basins are constructed on sandy soils, which allows runoff to quickly percolate through the bottom of the basin. At first glance, infiltration basins look like the worthless dry extended detention ponds. However, infiltration basins usually have white plastic observation wells to ensure that underlying soil is drained completely in 2 or 3 days. Also, the vertical portion of the spillway, known as a riser, is designed so runoff must pond to a depth of a foot or 2 before it reaches the first opening where it can flow into the riser. This forces the first foot or 2 of runoff to infiltrate through the basin floor, where 85 to 95% of pollutants are removed. Finally, some basins have a stone trench, or the entire floor is stone, which aids runoff in flowing down to permeable soils. Over time, fine particles clog the basin floor and prevent infiltration. Water may then be retained in a basin long enough for wetland vegetation to colonize. If you see cattails or other water-loving plants, the clogged surface soils need to be scraped from the basin floor to restore infiltration. Here we have one of the most effective BMPs, bioretention. It can remove 70 to 95% of the runoff and trained pollution it receives. As shown in the upper left illustration, a pit is excavated 4 feet deep into permeable soils. Most of the pit is filled with a highly organic sandy planting soil with a 3-inch layer of mulch on top. A 6 to 12-inch depression is left at the surface. The purpose of this depression is to store the first inch of runoff from the building, streets, or parking areas draining to the BMP. As the runoff percolates down through the mulch and planting soil, most of the pollutants are removed. The much cleaner runoff then flows from the facility and travels through the earth to emerge as essential inflow to a wetland or a spring. Bioretention must drain completely in 48 hours, so if you see standing water or wetland vegetation, repairs are needed. If the storage depth is less than 6 inches, then cleaning may be required as well. All 6 Bay states and D.C. have adopted more effective approaches to stormwater management, which are known as environmental site design, low impact development, etc. While ESD LID, there is much greater emphasis on protecting sensitive areas first, like stream buffers, then minimizing impervious areas and treating runoff with small but highly effective BMPs. With ESD LID, there's a good chance we can gain all the benefits of growth with no negative aquatic resource impacts. For further detail on ESD LID, visit the CEDS webpage on the left and click ESD Resources. All 6 Bay watershed states and DC have adopted guidance manuals like that on the right. You'll find links to these manuals on our ESD webpage. again by clicking ESD resources along the left. Or you can just Google the name of your state and stormwater management. To determine if a project makes full use of ESD, you'll need two key documents, the concept plan and the report. Most volunteer and professional clean water advocates learn of a proposed development project by seeing a sign like the one here in the upper left. Note the project name, application number, then make arrangements to review project files by calling the number given on the sign. Within these files you should find the plan and a report. Maryland has identified 15 practices which are highly effective in protecting aquatic resources. Chapter 5 of the new Maryland Stormwater Design Manual lists 15 ESD practices, which are grouped into these three categories. The applicant is required to exhaust efforts to direct all impervious surface runoff to one or more of these practices. These are the three alternative surface practices. From a water quality perspective, a green roof is the least effective because it doesn't provide groundwater recharge. However, a green roof does provide heating and cooling benefits, which other practices do not. ESD practices can be combined in a train that negates the limitations of any single practice. So a green roof which doesn't provide recharge can drain to a dry well which would release runoff into the soil. Permeable pavers and reinforced turf can be used for parking spaces, streets, sidewalks, patios, etc. The three non-structural practices are intended to serve very short sections of impervious surfaces which adjoin flat, pervious areas such as grass or woods. The idea is that the relatively small volume of runoff from the impervious surface will mostly soak into the adjoining pervious area where pollutants will be removed and recharge will occur. Here are the 9 microscale practices. With the exception of rainwater harvesting, these practices force runoff through a column of planting soil which has a high pollutant removal capacity. The pollutants are then stored well below the effects of surface runoff. Additionally, most provide excellent groundwater recharge, which is critical to maintaining dry weather inflow to wetlands, streams, and other aquatic resources. Finally, most microscale practices can be designed to manage the one-year storm, thought to be the key to preventing stream channel erosion. Most development projects are required to maintain an undisturbed buffer of 50 to 100 feet along wetlands, streams, and other waterways. Here we have an example where buffer requirements are not being met. A shopping center and road will be built upon the wetland and stream buffers shown with the red arrows. ESD LID usually requires retention of a minimum amount of forest on a site or setting aside an area to be converted to forest. The plan you see here states that a fee will be paid in lieu of meeting forest conservation requirements on site, which conflicts with ESD LID principles. Here we have an example of one of the better ESD plans. The red arrow shows the general direction of runoff flow from uphill to down. Note that the stream buffer is preserved since it is beyond the limits of disturbance, or LOD. As the phrase implies, heavy equipment is not allowed past the LOD. Many local enforcement agencies require erecting an orange plastic fence along the LOD to further prevent unintended disturbance. The limits of disturbance also protect forest intended to be preserved through a perpetual easement. Finally, note that each house and driveway will drain to a proposed micro-bioretention facility, which is one of the most effective ESD practices. The bottom line, this plan fully complies with ESD LID requirements by first, fully preserving stream buffers, forest is preserved with easements, and all impervious surfaces will drain to ESD LID practices. While ESD LID applied to development of farms and forests can prevent further loss of aquatic resources, the redevelopment of suburban urban sites can help restore those 12,000 miles of bay tributaries degraded by past growth. Here we see a redevelopment site in downtown Baltimore. A new building is proposed for the area in yellow, but the entire site is outlined in red. Maryland ESD requires treating runoff from a minimum of half the red area with highly effective ESD practices. Each acre retrofitted with ESD practices restores 300 feet of degraded waters. As redevelopment progresses, waters which are unfit for any uses today become suited for wading, swimming, and even fishing over the next several decades. A point source discharge occurs where pollutants are released into waters at a discrete point, such as a pipe or the bottom of a landfill. With most non-point sources, runoff washes pollutants from large diffuse areas. Each point source must comply with a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, which contains limits on the types and amounts of pollution that can be released. Here we see some of the most common point source discharges in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. A major discharger releases at least 1 million gallons per day of wastewater. The major discharges are far more closely monitored when compared to the minors. Here you see the most recent nationwide U.S. EPA evaluation of the minor discharges. Note that 54% had significant violations of their NPDES permits during 2011, the most recent year studied. There are nearly 50,000 facilities which hold a discharge permit. To learn if such a facility is located in your watershed, visit the U.S. EPA ECHO website. ECHO also tells you how frequently each facility has violated pollution limits. A word of caution, though, the ECHO data can be quite inaccurate, so cooperation first should begin by verifying that permit limits have in fact been exhausted by posing that question to the applicant. Say something like, the ECHO data says that you've violated your permit numerous times. Is that true? If so, what's being done to correct the problem? One of the best ways to prevent aquatic resource harm is to apply treated wastewater to the land. But most of these facilities are small and hard to see from nearby public areas. Many, though, are owned by local governments, so you can request a tour. Or even if privately owned, you can still request a tour. Since these minor discharges are seldom inspected, problems can go on for months or more. The photo on the left is of essentially raw sewage, which flowed from a failed land application field for more than a year until discovered by citizens. Prompt reports then led to corrective action. CAFOs are very common in some portions of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Like land application sites, CAFOs can be hard to see from nearby roads, but you could use the monitoring techniques described later in this presentation to detect problems. Now for the last of our 6 sources, cropfields and pastures. Unlike previous sources, these two are mostly managed through voluntary programs. In other words, there's little enforcement agencies can do except in situations where water pollution is extreme. This is why we urge you to look for opportunities to encourage and support farm owners in using BMPs. When you see an example, then thank the farm owner via letters such as you see here. The table in the upper right gives an indication of the dramatic reduction in cropfield pollution attainable with just 2 BMPs. With conventional tillage, little plant residue protects the soil surface from erosive forces, as in the left middle photo. With conservation tillage, substantial residue protects the soil, as in the lower left photo. Winter cover crops and stream buffers are also effective practices and warrant a thank you letter to the farm owner. With pastures visible from nearby roads or aerial photos, look for streams with at least a 35-foot grass buffer or a 100-foot forest buffer. Look for evidence of gullies or bare patches of soil, both of which may indicate overgrazing. See if the number of livestock using a pasture exceeds the limits recommended by your state extension university. If the buffers are present with no gullies or other signs of erosion, then send a thank you letter to the farm owner. Assessing the health of streams and other waters is key to identifying pollution sources missed through the procedures described thus far. Most of us think of meters or chemical tests when monitoring comes to mind, but aquatic life are actually a far more effective way of identifying problems than tracing each to a source. For the vast majority of the bay's 100,000 miles of tributaries, aquatic insect monitoring is the best method. Most live in shallow, fast-flowing riffle areas and can be sampled with an inexpensive net or even by hand. Here you see photos of the most common stream insects. Critters that tolerate pollution generally have few legs and worm-like bodies, while sensitive insects have 6 or more legs and a roach-like appearance. Here we have an example of just how powerful these organisms can be in detecting pollution sources. The stream you see here is Second Mine Branch. It's flowing from your right to left. Stoneflies are among the most sensitive stream insects to pollution. Let's say you find stoneflies at the upper road crossing in the center of this map, but they're absent at the next road crossing downstream. By working back upstream, you should find what is killing the stoneflies. While chemical monitoring may not have the overall benefits of aquatic life sampling, it does have its places. This is particularly true of portable meters, which allow you to measure stream chemistry in the field. If you find an unusual reading or a violation of water quality standards, then you can search for road crossings by access point to pinpoint a source of pollution. Here we see an example where a portable conductivity meter traced unusually high readings to a source, which turned out to be a county landfill. Volunteers used a handheld meter to measure conductivity along Little Falls in Baltimore County. After sampling a number of points along the main stem, they noticed higher readings where an interstate highway crossed. While they first assumed highway road salt was the cause, they traced the readings to the old landfill. Earlier we mentioned the use of monitoring to assess the impact of CAFOs and other point source discharges. For facilities where you cannot gain access, stream monitoring may be the only way to determine if a problem exists. If you can gain access to walk a stream or just to examine the waterway at each access point, then look for pollution indicators. On days when enough rain has caused runoff, this can be a great way to trace large areas of exposed soil and muddy runoff to a source. You can also simply examine a few rocks from a roadside riffle to see if the abundance of sensitive critters has changed. In tidal waters, the appearance of bottom sediments can indicate pollution sources. Most of the Chesapeake's tidal sediments are the grayish color of silty clay in the lower left photo. If sediments are the deep black of the lower right photo, then there's a good chance sewage spills, livestock waste, or other sources of organic enrichment are polluting the waterway. If your watershed is large and there are numerous BMPs, construction sites, or proposed development projects, then consider looking at a sampling. If the sample shows substantial noncompliance, then the resulting publicity could provide government agencies with the support needed to upgrade enforcement efforts. This approach would be a far better use of your time than just going from one BMP to the next. You should also consider a joint effort with other watershed groups active in the same county or larger area. If you have any questions, then please give me a call. We can answer most questions free of charge unless they require research on our part. But we'll let you know first before turning a meter on. Also, please call, don't email. It's far easier to respond to a call than an email. 2/3 of the people we help take advantage of this free assistance, plus our other support. The other third hire CEDS to manage a portion or all of their effort, which is how we stay in business. To learn more about how CEDS can help with a long list of issues in addition to aquatic resource protection, please visit our main website at CEDS.org. You can also download our 300-page book, How to Win Land Development Issues, for free from our publications webpage, CEDS.org/publications. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation, and best wishes as you seek out and correct the pollution sources limiting human uses of your favorite waterway.